condemned for empty wombs, saved by a man with an empty house. The stove had gone cold again. I don't know how many mornings I'd walked into that kitchen and put my hand to the iron top and felt nothing. A week. Could have been 3. Time does that when there's nobody keeping it honest for you. It just runs sideways, pooling in corners, and you stop counting the days and start just getting through the light and waiting for the dark. Margaret had kept that stove going. Every morning before I was even out of bed I could hear it, the hiss when she set the iron lid back down, the creak of the grate, the particular sound a fire makes when someone who knows what they're doing tends to it. I used to lie there and listen and think, that's a good sound. That right there. And I'd get up and go to her. She'd been gone 14 months. I know that number because I counted it up one afternoon out of something close to spite, like if I could name it, it might get smaller. It didn't. The house had 22 rooms. We built it bigger than sense because Margaret said she wanted a place that could hold a family and not feel crowded. I'd poured 4 summers into those walls, drove nails by lantern when I couldn't stop for dark. We had this idea, her and me, rooms for children, rooms for growing, a wide porch for sitting when we were old and surrounded. 22 rooms and the 2 of us and then just me, and the rooms didn't shrink. They got larger somehow. The way a hole in a fence looks bigger in winter. I want to be plain about what 14 months of that does to a man. I don't mean the missing, which is a separate thing and which I've got no good words for anyway. I mean the daily effect of it, the going through. You stop doing things that take more than one person to justify. Stop cooking real meals, what's the point? Stop keeping the fire in the evening because you're just going to bed anyway and it's only you. Stop splitting extra wood, stop filling the lamp on the side table by the second chair, stop all the small maintenance of a life that exists for 2 people. You keep the cattle work because you have to. Everything else just subsides, goes quiet. And after a while, you don't notice the quiet because you've gotten quiet yourself, and you and the house match each other, and that matching feels like peace, but it isn't. It's just done. I still worked. A man's got cattle and the cattle don't care that he's dying on the inside. I rode out every morning, did what needed doing, came back in the evening, ate something cold more often than not, and sat in the chair by the fireplace that I never lit anymore. You can keep your body going for a long time after the rest of you has quit. I was finding that out. My neighbor Harshal came by now and then. He'd stand in my kitchen with his hat in his hands and look at the state of things without saying much, and then he'd say something like, "You ought to hire on somebody, Ed, to keep the house." And I'd say I'd think about it, and he'd leave, and I'd go back to whatever I'd been doing, which was mostly nothing. It was October when she came to the gate. I was coming back from the south pasture, late. The sun already behind the mesa and the air going that particular purple-blue that means cold by nightfall. I saw something at the gate from 50 yards out and thought it was a coyote messing with the latch, which they'll do, and then I got closer and saw it wasn't a coyote. She was sitting on the flat top of the gate post, just sitting there with her back straight and a carpet bag on her knee and her feet dangling off the side like she was waiting for a stage that might or might not come. She had dark hair and a set to her face that I couldn't read at that distance. Not scared, not comfortable, just there, decided. I pulled up and she looked at me. Her eyes were brown, dark brown, the kind that don't give much away. "This the Aldrin place," she said. "It is. I heard in Creosote that you might need a cook." I hadn't said that to anybody. Harshal had, though. He'd been making noises about me hiring on somebody to keep the house, and I'd been ignoring him because that's what I was doing with most things. "Harshal send you." Harshal pointed me at the road. I sent myself. I looked at her a moment. She didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't do any of the things people do when they're not sure of themselves. She just sat on that gate post in the going dark with her bag on her knee. "What's your name?" "Nora Caswell, or it was. I go by Nora." The "or it was" I let sit. Not my business what she was walking away from. You can cook, I said. Better than you, I'd wager. I thought about the cold stove. I thought about the tin of hardtack I'd been eating for supper 3 nights running. There's a room, I said, over the kitchen, small. Small's fine. I swung the gate open, and she got down from the post and walked through ahead of me, and that was that. I didn't know then what she was walking away from. Didn't know what the town of Creosote had done to her, or what her husband had said to her in front of Garrity's store. I found all that out later in pieces, the way you find things out when you live close to someone, and they're not hiding it from you, but they're not advertising it either. She'd been married 6 years to a man named Caswell, a merchant in Creosote. Decent enough, I suppose, but with a mother who was not, and the mother had decided over time that the trouble with the marriage was Nora. The trouble being that there were no children. 6 years and no children, and the mother had worked on Caswell for 2 of those years until he'd finally said to Nora in front of Garrity's that she was a barren woman and he wanted his house back. Not shouted. Quiet. The kind of quiet that carries across a street. She'd walked out of Creosote with her bag that same day. Harshaw's wife had taken her in for a week before Harshaw, not unkind but practical, had said he knew of a man who lived alone out on the Aldrin Road who might need the help. I didn't know any of that the first night. I showed her the room over the kitchen and she put her bag on the bed and looked around it with that same unreadable expression. 12 feet by 10, a window looking south, a good mattress because I'd paid for one when we built, figuring it might be for guests. This is all right, she said. Supper's whatever you find in the kitchen. I expect there's not much. There never is, with a man living alone. She said it plain, not unkind, just plain. I went and sat in my chair. In the morning the stove was going. I don't know how she found the kindling. I'd let the box go low and hadn't split more because I wasn't feeling the cold anyway, or wasn't paying attention to it, which amounts to the same thing when you're my kind of empty. But she'd found enough and the kitchen was warm, and there was coffee and there were eggs, though God knows where the eggs came from because I'd stopped collecting them, and assumed the hens had given up on me the same as most things had. She put a plate in front of me and sat across the table with her own, and didn't say anything. We ate like that. There is a particular quiet between 2 people who have both lost something and know it about each other without saying so. Not comfortable exactly, not uncomfortable, just honest. I'd forgotten what honest felt like, living alone that long. Most of what people say to a grieving man is careful, chosen for softness rather than truth. And after a while the careful conversation feels worse than silence. Your wife, she said after a while. 14 months. Were you happy? Nobody had asked me that. People ask how you're managing. They ask if you need anything. They don't ask if you were happy. I thought about Margaret and the sound she made with the stove and the way she laughed at things I said that weren't even all that funny, just laughed because she was generous that way, and how she'd hold my hand when we sat on the porch in the evening, not squeezing it, just holding it, letting me know she was there. Yes, I said. Nora nodded. She looked at her plate. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it. I could tell the difference between people who say it because it's what you say and people who mean it. She meant it. We left it there, and I went out to work. She settled into the house the way water settles into ground slowly, finding the low places, moving around what's fixed. She didn't rearrange things or try to make her mark. She figured out where things were and worked with them. The kitchen got organized over the first week in ways I couldn't quite track but felt, the way you feel a room is right without being able to say why. She cooked like someone who'd been doing it a long time out of genuine care for the result. Not fancy. Good. Beans with real salt pork, not the rind. Biscuits that held together instead of falling apart. She did something with the coffee. I never asked what, felt stupid asking. That made it taste the way coffee ought to taste, but somehow never does when you make it yourself. She started small things around the house that I'd let go. The hinge on the back door had been sticking for 3 months, and I'd learned to lift and lean at the right angle without thinking about it. I came in one afternoon and it swung free. She'd oiled it. I noticed but didn't say anything. The following week the gap under the south window that had been letting in cold got plugged with a rag stuffed neat and held with a trim piece she'd found in the barn. The week after that the curtains in the main room, which I hadn't touched since Margaret died, got washed and rehung, and they looked different and I didn't know why until I realized they'd been rehemmed so they actually reached the sill. She wasn't performing industry for my benefit. She was just doing the work. There was a difference. I started coming home for dinner again, not just wandering in when I happened to be close to the house, riding in with some intention to it, coming home. I don't know exactly when I started watching her, not in any wrong way, just noticing. The way she held herself when she was reading, she'd found Margaret's books, hadn't touched them at first. Then one evening I came in and she was at the table with one open and she looked up and I didn't say anything and she didn't either and she went back to reading. The way she moved through the kitchen with an economy that was almost graceful, no wasted steps. She had a habit, when she was thinking, of rubbing her thumb against the side of her index finger back and forth slow. I noticed that. She noticed things too. She noticed I didn't eat much if I was tired. She noticed I came in harder on days when I'd been fighting with something in the south pasture, not harder at her, just harder at the world, jaw set, heavy in my shoulders. On those evenings, she'd have something warm ready without fuss, and she wouldn't try to talk me out of whatever was sitting on me. She'd just let me be in the house. That was something. Most people, when they see a man carrying something heavy, want to help him put it down. They ask questions, they offer remedies, they fill the air. I had been doing the grief alone for so long that the shape of people filling the air had become a kind of irritant I'd stopped noticing. Nora didn't do that. She saw the weight and gave me room. That takes a particular intelligence, knowing when a person needs space more than company. Margaret had known it too. I filed that away. There were other things I filed away. The way she talked about her mother, with plain affection and no decoration. The way you talk about someone who was good and gone, and that's just the truth of it. Her mother had died 3 years into her marriage. She mentioned this once in passing and only once, but I understood from the way she said it that she'd been lonelier than she let on in creosote. Not for lack of a husband, for lack of someone who actually saw her. I understood that species of lonely. She was a reader, which I'd gathered from the books, but she read with a pencil and left small marks in the margins, not underlines, not words, just little check marks beside things she wanted to think about longer. I never read what she'd marked. But sometimes I'd pick up a book she'd finished and see the checks scattered through it like a private trail, and I'd think about what it said about a person that, when they met something true, they wanted to mark the spot. She'd been there 3 weeks when I found her on the porch on a night that was clear enough to see the whole run of stars from the mountains down to the flats. She had a blanket around her shoulders. I stood in the doorway and she didn't turn, but she said, "Come look. You can see the whole river." She meant the stars. There's a scatter of them that runs across the middle of the sky like a river if you look long enough. And I knew what she meant, but it surprised me that she saw it the same way I did. I came out and stood by the railing and looked up. "My mother showed me that," she said. "When I was small, she said it was water for people who were thirsty and couldn't find any." I didn't ask what she was thirsty for. I thought I might know. We stood there a good while. The cold came up from the ground the way it does in October, slow and certain. She pulled the blanket tighter. "Do you want to go in?" I said. "Not yet." So we stayed. A nighthawk went over somewhere in the dark. Far off, a coyote answered something nobody'd asked. The stars did what they do, which is nothing you can see happening but nothing you can prove isn't. That was the first night I felt something that wasn't just the absence of things. Something present, small and cautious, like a fire you've just started from one coal and you're not sure yet if it'll take. I didn't trust it, and I didn't say anything about it, but I felt it. November came and the work got heavier and the days shorter. The south pasture fence had sections that hadn't been right since spring, and I'd kept meaning to get to it. I rode out on a Tuesday with the post maul and wire and spent 2 long days at it, coming in after dark both nights cold and not much good for conversation. She fed me and left me alone, and I went to bed and went back out. The fence got fixed. I came in the second evening and sat at the table, and she put coffee in front of me, and I looked at it, and then I said, "That fence hasn't been right for 8 months." "You got to it," she said. "Margaret would have been after me about it by June." She looked at me, not carefully, just straight. Sounds like she knew how to move things along. She did. I turned the mug in my hands. She had a way of mentioning something once, just once, and then letting you walk around it until you tripped over it, like she knew if she said it more it'd just make you stubborn. Smart woman. Very. Nora sat down with her own coffee. We'd started doing that in the evenings, just sitting at the table after supper, not always talking, sometimes talking. It had become a thing we did. Neither of us had planned it. It was just what the evenings became. "Did you ever get stubborn anyway?" she said. "Sometimes." "What happened?" "I'd fix whatever needed fixing, and she'd be gracious enough not to say, 'I told you so.'" "That's the trick of it," Nora said, "the gracious part." "It is," I said. "Harder than it sounds." She looked at her hands for a moment. Did she know how good she had it, how much you thought of her? The question hit sideways. I sat with it a moment. "I hope so," I said. "I think so. I told her enough." "Good," Nora said. "Some men don't." Was Caswell that way? I hadn't said his name before. She looked at me, not surprised exactly, just measuring whether I was asking with any kind of trouble in it. I wasn't. "He wasn't unkind," she said. "He was occupied. With his business, with the town, with what people thought of him. I was part of the picture he wanted to make. When the picture turned out not quite right, he didn't know what to do about it except blame the paint." "You're not paint," I said. She looked at me then, really looked. "No," she said, "I'm not." We sat there a while longer. Outside, the wind had come up off the mesa, and the kitchen windows had gone dark and close with the cold beyond them. I thought about the picture Caswell had wanted to make and the woman he'd thrown out because she didn't fit it, and I thought about what kind of fool does that, has a woman like this at his table and looks past her at some imagined version he'd rather have. I didn't say any of that. It wasn't mine to say, but I thought it. I had a ranch hand who came by for seasonal work, a man named Duval who'd been working the county for years and knew everyone's business without ever appearing to seek it out. He came in early November for the fall work and spent 3 days helping me move cattle and mend what the fence project hadn't covered. He was around Nora at meals and in the evenings when he came in. Not rude about it. Just watching, the way men do when they're trying to figure out what something is. On the last evening before he left, he sat at the kitchen table and had his supper, and Nora was moving around the kitchen, and he waited until she'd gone upstairs. And then he said, quietly, without looking at me, "That's a good woman, Ed." "Yes, she is," I said. He nodded. That was all. He left the next morning before first light, and I paid him, and we shook hands, and he didn't say anything more about it. But it sat with me, not because I needed Duval to tell me. Because having it said out loud by someone else made it more real. The way a thing you've been thinking will sometimes get more solid when another person speaks it. "That's a good woman, yes she is." I thought about that on the ride back from the south pasture that afternoon in the gray November light. Thought about what it meant to know something and not know what to do with the knowing. Thought about what a man my age does with a feeling he doesn't quite trust yet because he's learned what it costs to trust the wrong things. Then I thought about Nora at the gatepost in the October dark, feet dangling, bag on her knee. Decided. The kind of decided that doesn't need persuading. I went home and laid the fire. I came in one evening in mid-November and found her at the table with her hands wrapped around her coffee and something in her face I hadn't seen before. She'd been into town for flour. I'd let her take the buckboard. I hung up my coat. I didn't say anything, just looked at her and knew. "Someone say something to you," I said. She took a moment. "Mrs. Garrity." Garrity's store. I knew what that meant. "What'd she say?" "Nothing that wasn't said before." She looked at her hands. I thought maybe I'd gotten far enough from it." Her voice was steady. That was worse somehow, the steadiness of it, because I knew what it cost. "You want me to speak to Garrity about his wife?" I said. She looked at me then. I don't know what I looked like, but whatever it was made her go still for a moment. "No," she said. "Thank you, no." "All right. It doesn't matter what they say." "It matters," I said. "It matters because it's wrong. You didn't do anything wrong." She held her mug and was quiet a long moment. "My husband's mother used to say the Lord withholds children from women he's punishing. Your husband's mother is an ignorant woman." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was related to one. Then she went quiet again. "I wanted them," she said. "Children, I want you to know that I wanted them. She stopped, started again quieter. "It's not that I didn't want them." "I know," I said. "I know it isn't. Margaret and I had tried too. Not as long, we'd only had 3 years before she got sick, but long enough that I knew something about wanting a thing and not getting it through no fault of your own. That particular grief that doesn't have a name because there's no one thing you're grieving, just the shape of the life you'd imagine going to smoke." "You're a good woman," I said, "whatever anybody in Creosote says." She looked at me. Those brown eyes held mine. "I know what I am," she said. "I just don't always know what to do with it out here." "You don't have to do anything with it. You can just be it." I don't know where that came from. It wasn't the kind of thing I usually said. She held my eyes for a long moment, and then she looked away toward the window and the dark outside it, and something in her face had shifted. Something had gone a little softer than it had been before. I got up and refilled her coffee and mine and sat back down, and we talked for another hour about nothing of consequence. About the south pasture fence and whether it needed a new post by the east corner, about whether the winter was coming early, about the best and worst horses I'd ever owned, about what she'd read last in Margaret's books. The easiest hour I'd had in a long time. I started tending the fireplace again. I don't know when I noticed I was doing it. Some evening in late November I came in and laid the fire without thinking, just did it, and sat in my chair, and she came in from the kitchen with her mending and sat across from me, and we sat there in the warmth, me reading my almanac that I hadn't touched since spring, and I realized after a while that the house felt different. Not smaller. The rooms were still there, all 22, still too many for 2 people, but the pressure of them was different, like they weren't waiting on me to fail them anymore, like they were just rooms. I thought about that, about how a thing can be exactly the same and feel entirely different depending on what you're sitting next to. December. The cold came down from the high country like it had been storing up. An early snow, more than a foot, and the cattle in the south pasture needed checking, and I went out in weather that had no business being ridden in, and my horse threw a shoe in the worst possible place. 4 miles from the house on the ridge above Garner Creek, where the wind comes off the peak straight and mean and doesn't care what it hits. I walked him in. 4 miles, through snow up to the knee in the low spots, leading a limping horse. By the time I got to the barn I couldn't feel my hands. Couldn't feel my feet much either, and my face was a thing happening somewhere south of my skull. She was watching from the kitchen window. She had the door open before I got to the porch. She sat me at the kitchen table and pulled my boots off and wrapped my feet in a dry cloth and put my hands in a bowl of warm water, not hot, warm. She knew the difference, and said nothing while she did it. I sat there feeling the feeling come back in my fingers, that particular slow agony of returning blood, and she held the bowl steady and didn't look away from what she was doing. It took a while. When I could make a fist, she said, "Stay there. and went and got my dry socks from the chest by the door and brought them and went around the table and crouched down and put them on my feet for me. Careful and plain, like it was just a thing that needed doing. I looked down at her hands on my feet, capable hands, not soft. "Nora," I said. She looked up. I don't know what I was going to say, something. What came out was, "Thank you." She held my gaze a moment. "Don't do that again," she said. "Go out in weather like that alone." "I've been doing it for years." "I know," she said. "Don't." She stood up and went back to the stove, and that was all she said. But there was something in it, in the "don't." That wasn't just practical advice. It was the kind of thing you say to someone you've decided you're not done with. The kind of don't that has weight behind it. That has something it's protecting. I sat in that kitchen with my warm feet and my thawing hands, and thought about what kind of man I was becoming, that a woman kneeling to put socks on his feet felt like the most significant thing that had happened to him in a year and a half. The answer was, a man coming back from somewhere cold and far off. That's the kind. I slept that night like I hadn't since the before time. Deep, full, the kind where you wake up not knowing how much time has passed. I lay there in the gray morning and listened to her moving around below in the kitchen and the sound of the stove taking the fire she was building, and I thought, that's a good sound. That right there. January, cold, that meant business. She'd been in the house 3 months. We'd worked out a life that was quiet and organized and real. I brought in wood without being asked because I knew she'd need it. She had coffee made when I came in because she knew I would. We knew each other's routines the way people do when they pay attention, when they actually look at each other instead of just sharing space. There's a kind of intimacy in that knowing that doesn't get talked about because it isn't dramatic. It's not fire. It's closer to what a fire becomes after the wood's been burning a long time, steady, reliable, something you can count on being there when you come in from the cold. I had forgotten that I'd once had that and could have it again. I'd thought the first kind, the bright, surprised, new kind, was the only kind that counted. I was wrong about that. The steady kind counts too. In some ways it counts more, because it's harder to build and you know what it costs. I fixed things. I didn't know I was doing it at first, or I knew and didn't examine it too closely, but I was fixing things around that house I'd been letting go for over a year. The loose board on the third porch step, the water catch at the east corner that had been draining wrong since September, the bolt on the barn door that had been cross-threaded since spring. I went through the place piece by piece over the weeks in January when weather kept me close to home, and I fixed it. And it was the first time in 14 months that I'd been doing work that wasn't strictly necessary. Work that was about the house being better, not just functional. Work you do when the house means something. One morning I came down and found her in the parlor, which I almost never went into anymore. She was standing at the window looking out at the snow on the pasture. She heard me on the stairs and turned, not startled, and she had a particular expression, thoughtful, a little far off. "You could put a chair here," she said. She meant by the window. "There used to be one. I moved it." She looked at the window, at the view, which was good, the whole south pasture and the mesa beyond, and in the right light at the right time of year, a long way further than that. "It's a good place for a chair," she said. I got the chair from the back room where I'd put it and carried it to the parlor and set it by the window. She looked at it there. "Now you need two," she said. "I suppose I do." I got the other one. We sat in those chairs that afternoon, not for long, maybe half an hour, looking out at the snow and the pale winter light on the pasture. She had her coffee. I had mine. The parlor had been a room I'd stopped going into because it had too much of Margaret in it, too many of the things she'd chosen and arranged. I thought sitting in it would feel like an intrusion on a grief I'd already been having, but it didn't feel that way with Nora there. It felt like a room again. Just a room, with good chairs and a good window. One afternoon I came in and she was at the table and she'd been crying. Not anymore, she'd stopped before I came in, and I wouldn't have known except that she'd gone very still in a particular way, The way people go still when they're trying to make sure they're finished. I hung up my coat. I didn't make a production of it. You don't have to say, I said. I know. She was quiet a moment. I got a letter. From Caswell. She didn't answer, which was the answer. I sat down across from her. She had the letter on the table, but I didn't look at it. He wants to marry again, she said. He wrote to say so. I think he wanted to feel better about it. He said he wished me well. She looked at the grain of the table. He did always have good manners. Just not much spine, I said. She made that almost laugh again. No, not much. You care about him marrying again. She considered it honestly, the way she did most things. No, I don't love him. I was fond of him once when things were good between us. But I don't love him and I don't care who he marries. She paused. It was just having it in a letter, permanent, like a door you knew was closed but hearing the latch fall. I understand that, I said. She looked at me. Do you? 14 months, I said, and I still hear doors sometimes. She held my eyes. Then she put her hand on the table, not reaching for me, just putting it there flat like she needed to feel something solid, and the table was what was available. After a moment I put mine next to hers, not touching, just there. We sat like that for a while. Outside the wind was doing something cold and serious to the eaves. Inside there was the fire I'd laid that morning, and the smell of something she'd been making for supper, something with onions and salt, and the letter on the table between us that neither of us looked at. This is a good house, she said finally, the way you say a thing when you've been thinking it for a while. Margaret thought so. She was right. She looked at the walls. It wants to be full. It had that idea once. Not gone, she said, just quiet. She said it back to me, what I'd said about the doors weeks before. I don't think she was doing it on purpose. I think she was just saying what was true. I looked at her hand on the table. I looked at mine next to it. The gap between them was maybe 2 inches. Nora, I said. She looked at me, those dark eyes steady. I think I'm not as done as I thought I was. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, more like recognition, like she'd been watching for something and it had finally come around a corner into view. No, she said, I don't think you are. I put my hand on hers. She turned hers over, slow, and held mine. We sat like that at the kitchen table in January with the wind on the house, and the fire behind us and her letter there between us, and neither of us said anything more about any of it. Her hand was warm. I'd forgotten what warm felt like when it wasn't just a thing in the room, when it was coming from a person who meant it. We talked after that. Or we started talking differently, the same 2 people in the same house but with something between us named now, at least between ourselves, even if we hadn't said it in those words. We talked about the house, about what she'd do with the garden come spring. She'd been thinking about a kitchen garden along the south wall, about the cattle, about the winter that was wearing on but starting just slightly to relent, about things further out, about what we wanted from the years ahead. I want to be careful here about what I say about hope. A man my age who's lost what I lost doesn't pick up hope easily, and if he does, he holds it quiet, doesn't wave it around. You've learned the weight of things by then. You know what a falling through feels like. But I am telling you there was hope in that house in January, real and growing, the kind that warms a room differently from a fire. She found the room in February. I'd cleaned it out back in December quietly across a few evenings. It had been storage, feed bags mostly, and things I hadn't known what to do with when Margaret died. I'd made it into what it was meant to be. Wide plank floor, good window looking south, good light in the afternoon. I put nothing in it, just left it as a room. I didn't say anything to Nora about it. I just did it and left it. She found it on a February afternoon when I was outside. I came in and found her standing in the doorway of it looking in, not saying anything. She heard me come in and turned. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me with those dark eyes, and I saw in them what I had felt the whole time I was cleaning that room, that careful, private hope that you carry like a coal you're afraid to breathe on too hard in case it goes out. She saw it in my face too, I suppose. "Whatever happens," I said. She understood exactly what I meant. I could see that she did. "Whatever happens," she said back. It was a way of saying, "I know this may not go the way we hope." It was also a way of saying, "We're in this together whatever it is, and that matters regardless." February was hard in the way February is always hard. Long, gray, not quite winter anymore, but not anything else either. The days were getting longer, but you couldn't feel it yet. I'd go out and work and come in, and there'd be supper, and there'd be the fire, and there'd be Nora. And on the worst of the gray days that was enough. It was more than enough. I asked her one evening in late February flat out, the way you ask things when you've run out of patience with circling around them. "What do you want from this, from being here?" She looked at me, she didn't look away. "I want to stay," she said, "if you'll have me." "I'll have you," I said, "in whatever way you're willing." She was quiet a moment. "I'm willing in every way. I want you to know that plainly." I held her eyes. "I know it." "Do you want the same?" "I do." She nodded. She looked at the table. Then she looked back up and she said, "Then I think we should stop being careful about it." That made me laugh. Really laugh from down somewhere in the chest where laughing lives when it's real. She looked startled and then she laughed too, and it was the first time I'd heard her laugh like that, full, not careful, not the almost laugh I'd been cataloging. The real one. "No more being careful," I agreed. We married in May. Small, just Harshaw and his wife and the preacher from Cedar Ridge who didn't know our business and didn't ask, and seemed happy enough to do the thing we were asking. Nora wore a dress that was the color of dry grass in certain light, not quite gold, not quite brown, and she stood beside me in it in front of the parlor windows, the windows with the good chairs in front of them now, and she said what she meant and I said what I meant, and Harshaw's wife cried a little, and Harshaw shook my hand after with both of his, and held it a long time without saying anything. He's that kind of man, says it with holding. There was a moment just before the preacher started when Nora looked at me, just looked, and in her face, in those dark eyes that I'd learned by then could give a great deal away if you knew how to read them, I saw something that I don't have a single word for. It was composed of several things: sureness, warmth, something that had come through loss and kept going, something that was choosing right now on purpose with full knowledge of what was being chosen, me, this house, this life, whatever came. I looked back at her, and I hope she saw the same. We had a good summer, the kind you earn. I worked hard and she worked hard, and the house was alive in a way it hadn't been in a long time, not loud, not complicated, just alive. The kitchen garden went in along the south wall exactly where she'd planned it, and it came up better than either of us expected. Tomatoes and beans, and a row of something she called her mother's squash that sprawled wide and took over most of the east end and fed us squash until we were tired of squash, which takes longer than you'd think. I fixed the last of the things that needed fixing, and she made the house into the house it always should have been. And in the evenings we sat on the porch and watched the light come off the mesa, and sometimes we talked and sometimes we didn't. And it was all the same because she was there and I was there. And the house had its windows lit and its stove going, and the cattle were settled in the south pasture. And it was, for the first time in a long time, enough. More than enough. I want to tell you about the day creosote came to us, because it happened and it mattered, and the way she handled it told me more about her than everything else put together. It was a Saturday in late July, hot, the kind of hot that makes the air shimmer off the flat rock west of the barn. I was near the water trough by the near corral when I saw a buggy come up the road and turn in at our gate. I knew the rig before I knew who was in it, Caswell's good buggy, the black one with the red trim he'd always been proud of. He got down alone. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him in town, back before Nora and I were anything but employer and hired help, when he'd have been just another face in creosote to me. He had his hat in his hands before he'd cleared the gate, which told me something. I walked over. "Aldrin," he said. "Caswell," I waited. He looked at the house. "I heard you and Nora that you were married." "May," I said. He nodded slowly. He was looking at the house like he was trying to see through it. I wanted to, I don't know what I wanted. "I heard she was here and I thought I should come." He paused. "My mother is sick. She's been sick since April and they don't think she'll last the summer." He turned the hat in his hands. "I thought Nora ought to know, in case it mattered to her." "I'll tell her," I said. "Aldrin," he was having trouble with something. "She was a good wife. Nora was. I want you to know I know that. Whatever my mother, whatever was said. She was a good wife and I didn't." He stopped. I looked at him. A man standing in my front yard with his hat in his hands, trying to say a thing he should have said a long time ago to the right person. "You can tell her yourself," I said, "if you want to." He blinked. I went to the house. Nora was in the kitchen. I told her Caswell was at the gate, told her why he'd come, and I told her the choice was entirely hers. She didn't have to go out, and if she wanted me to send him off, I'd send him off. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "I'll go," and she untied her apron and hung it on the hook and went out. I watched from the kitchen window. I watched Caswell say something and her stand there and listen and then say something back. It wasn't long, 10 minutes, maybe less. She was calm the whole time, not cold. Just calm, the way she was in all things, and she looked at him the way she looked at most things. Straight, clear, nothing hidden and nothing on display. At the end she put out her hand and he shook it and he got back in his buggy and turned down the road. She came back inside and got her apron off the hook and put it on and went back to what she'd been doing. "All right," I said. "Fine," she looked at me. "He said he was sorry, about what his mother said, about what he said. I think he meant it." "Did it help?" She thought about that honestly. "Some," she said. "Not as much as I'd have thought it would a year ago, but some." I went back outside, watched the dust of Caswell's buggy settle back into the road, and then I went to work. That evening I told her what I'd been thinking about, not a polished speech, just the words as they came. I told her I knew she'd gotten here the hard way, and I knew what she'd walked away from, and I wanted her to know I saw that. All of it. The grit it took to sit on that gatepost in the October dark and send herself down a strange road. The cost of it. She was sitting across the table from me and she listened, and when I was done she said, "You did the same thing." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You came to me." "You let me in," she said. "After 14 months of whatever that was," she gestured slightly, meaning the house, the cold stove, all of it. "You could have sent me away. You didn't. You let me in and you left room for me and then you made room for me, and that was its own kind of grit." I thought about that. "I suppose," I said. "Not suppose," she said. "It's true." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her hand, by then I knew well, the slight roughness of it, the warmth, the way it settled against mine like it fit there because it did. "We got here the hard way," she said, "both of us. That means we know what it cost. I don't think we'll be careless with it." "No," I said, "I don't think we will." There's a thing that happened in September of that first year of marriage that I keep coming back to. Not a dramatic thing, but a true one. I'd had a bad run of days, the kind where everything that can go wrong does, in small ways that add up. A section of fence in the North Quarter came down in a storm, and I lost 2 head of cattle before I found the gap. The well pump gave me trouble for 3 days before I figured out what was wrong with it. One of my best horses threw a shoe on hardpan and went lame, and I didn't know for half a day if he'd recover right. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was the kind of grinding, ongoing, uncooperative difficulty that wears a man down differently than a single disaster does, slower, steadier, like water over stone. I came in on the third evening of it looking, I'm sure, exactly the way I felt. She didn't say anything at first. She fed me. We ate. She cleared up. Then she sat back down across from me and said, "Tell me." I looked at her. "All of it," she said. "The fence, the pump, the horse, whatever else. Tell me." So I told her, not summarized, not the version you give someone who's being polite. The actual account, with the frustration in it and the particular foolishness I'd felt about the pump, which should have been obvious to me from the start and wasn't, and the worry about the horse that I hadn't let myself look at directly because there wasn't anything more I could do. She listened. She didn't fix anything, didn't suggest anything. She just listened. When I was done, she said, "The horse is better." "He is," I said, "seems to be." "The fence and the pump are fixed." "They are." "So it's behind you." "It is." "Then let it be behind you," she said. "You worked hard and you fixed what needed fixing and it's done." She said it simply, not like a lecture, just like the plain truth it was. "You can put it down now." I looked at her across the table. I had been carrying all of it, the fence, the pump, the horse, the whole grinding week of it, the way I'd been carrying things for over a year. Alone inside with nowhere to put them down. And she just said, "Put it down." And because she'd said it and because I'd told her and because she'd actually listened to the telling rather than waiting for it to stop, I could. I felt it go, just go, like a load off a tired horse. "Thank you," I said. "Ed," she looked at me. "That's what I'm here for, part of it. That's what you're here for me. We're not just two people sharing a house and being polite to each other. She paused, looking for the right word. "We're in it together. You can give me the bad days, I'll give you mine." "You don't have many bad days," I said. "You don't see all of them," she said, not unkindly. I thought about that. She was right that I didn't. She kept things the way private people do. And I realized sitting there that I could be, that I wanted to be the person she gave them to. Not to fix, just to hear. "Give them to me," I said. "When you have them, I want them." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "All right." She saved my life, is what I'm saying. Not in the dramatic way of the word. She didn't pull me from a river or ride for a doctor in the dark. She just showed up at my gate on an October evening with her bag on her knee and her back straight and her dark eyes that didn't give much away. And she stayed. And she kept the stove going. And she put socks on my cold feet and sat across from me at the kitchen table and held my hand and said, "Not gone, just quiet." And she was right about that. A man can be not done and not know it. He can be finished with everything in his own assessment and still be wrong about himself. It turns out you need someone else's eyes for that sometimes. Someone who can see what you can't, who looks at the shut-down rancher with the 22-room empty house and sees not a done man but a quiet one. She saw it. She stayed until I caught up to what she saw. I don't take that lightly. I know what it cost her to walk away from creosote with her one bag and send herself down a road to the house of a man she'd never met, knowing the town was already talking, knowing what they'd say. She did it anyway. Not because she had nothing to lose, she had her dignity, her name, whatever remained of the life she'd known, but because she was that kind of woman, the kind who assesses a situation and decides and goes. The kind who doesn't wait to be rescued because she never expected to need rescuing, only to need a chance. I gave her the chance. She gave me back my life. I think that's a fair trade. Some evenings now I come in from the work and she's at the kitchen table with a book or her sewing, and she looks up when she hears my boots on the porch and she just looks at me the way she does. Those dark eyes that don't give much away mostly. But I've learned to read her, the way you learn a country when you've lived in it long enough, its weather and its seasons and where the water goes. I know what that look means. It means she sees me. All of me, the parts that work fine and the parts that are still a little tender, and the parts that are just old, and she's glad I'm there. I am seen, By a good woman who chose me, freely and with full knowledge of what she was choosing. After everything. That is not a small thing. That is everything is what that is. We're still here. The stove goes in the morning before I'm up. I lie there and listen to the sound she makes tending it, the hiss when the lid goes down, the creak of the grate, the particular sound of a fire being built by someone who knows what they're doing, and I think, that's a good sound. That right there. And I get up and I go to her.